This is session 10 of Human Endocrine System Unit, and in this session we are going to study about the hormone receptors. The learning objectives for this session are to understand the types of hormone receptors and to study the functioning of hormone receptors. And the session outcome of this session is the student will be able to understand the types of hormone receptors, and they will be able to understand how the receptors function. Every hormone is produced by an endocrine gland, and the hormones have target organs. For example, the follicle stimulating hormone, or we can take the thyroid stimulating hormone, which is produced by the pituitary gland. The hormone is directly released into the bloodstream, and via the bloodstream the hormone will reach the target organ. For TSH, the target organ is thyroid gland. Now the target organ must have receptors for that specific hormone, otherwise it will not respond to the action of the hormones. So hormone receptors are actually the molecules that bind to a specific hormone, and chemically these hormone receptors are protein molecules. And we find two types of hormone receptors. They are surface receptors, which are situated on the surface of the cell, and they are specific for peptide hormones. And we find intracellular receptors, which are situated inside the cell, and normally these intracellular receptors are for the steroid hormones. Now, coming to the surface receptors, which are specific for peptide hormones. We know proteins and peptides are water soluble. Therefore, they cannot diffuse through the hydrophobic lipid layer of the plasma membrane. Now, a peptide hormone like TSH is unable to enter into the cell because of the presence of the lipid layer in the plasma membrane. Therefore, the receptors for such peptide hormones are found on the cell surface. And the surface receptors, we find two kinds of surface receptors. One is G protein coupled receptor, and another type is enzyme linked receptor. Now, majority of surface receptors are G protein linked receptors, and the receptors may have relatively short extracellular amino terminal domain, which is observed for the receptors in TRH and GnRH, etc. Or they may have a very long extracellular domain. Now that means in first case we find very short part of the receptor uh, appearing on the surface of cell, and in the second case we can expect a very large part of the receptor on the surface of the target cell. Another type of surface receptor is used in the signaling of insulin, growth hormone, prolactin, etc. Now, this type is a transmembrane protein with either inherent protein tyrosine kinase activity on the intracellular domain or associated intracellular molecules that have this activity. So here what happens, the uh, in this type where signaling uh, is observed, the receptor is a transmembrane protein. That means the protein molecule which extends across the plasma membrane. And this particular receptor has a protein tyrosine kinase activity on the intracellular side, okay, or it is associated with another molecule which has that particular activity, I mean the tyrosine kinase activity. So this is another type of receptor uh, which extends across the membrane. They are called transmembrane receptors. Now the extracellular hormone receptor interactions induce dissociation of the associated intracellular trimeric G protein. Now what happens? The receptor molecules, they have attached G protein, and whenever there is an interaction between the hormone molecule and the receptor, so there is a dissociation of this particular G protein from the receptor. So this G protein will enter, and uh, this separation of or dissociation of G protein may open ion channels in the membrane, which may cause in the change in the functioning of that target cell, or it may activate a membrane bound enzyme that stimulates or inhibits the production of a second messenger like cyclic AMP. So anyway, a hormone molecule will bind to the receptor molecules, and in one case this binding will cause the separation of G protein from the receptor molecule, and this separation will lead to the opening of ion channels which will change the functioning of the target organ cell, or this may activate another enzyme which will either stimulate or inhibit the production of a secondary messenger like cyclic AMP. So that is how the hormone molecule will affect the target organ. And the surface receptors, they are the molecules which receive the hormone molecule. So this is the summary of this particular session. In this session we studied only the surface receptors. They are the molecules which receive the hormone molecule. The receptors for the protein or peptide hormones are found on the surface of the cell. So why? We already studied it, that the proteins are soluble in water and they cannot pass through the lipid part of the plasma membrane. Now most of the surface proteins are G protein receptors. That means they are coupled with G protein, and others are enzyme linked receptors. So the receptors, as we already discussed, either they are coupled with G protein or they are coupled with enzymes. So this is about the surface receptors in this session. So we request you to go through the references and read in detail about these surface receptors in the textbook, and also attend the multiple choice questions which are given in the PPTs. Thank you.